Welcome on into the Baseball Insiders. The New York Yankees are bad now. I'm Adam Weinrib, and I am joined, as always, by Fansided's MLB Insider, Robert Murray. We are going to be breaking down everything that we have learned since Monday's show, talking about three potentially underrated sellers who I think deserve more credit for the talent on the rosters than they're currently getting, and are also tripping closer to selling. Before we get into it and answer your questions as well, I appreciate everybody joining us. Get those questions in the chat, get them in the Discord. We'll run through them, but we couldn't do it without Robert Murray, who is here by my side. Robert, how you doing, dude?
Dude, I'm great, man. Definitely could not do this show without you. I mean, you're the guy who keeps the engine running and everything and provides all the good stuff here. But we appreciate you. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The trade market is not necessarily heating up. I had someone tell me the other day who was very plugged in that it's just stagnant right now. But I would imagine as we get closer to about the All-Star break or right thereafter, then it's going to end up getting pretty active. So then I would anticipate that, but just some quietness for now. Adam Weinrib, how are you?
I am good. Yeah, all 30 Major League Baseball teams are within 2 games of a playoff spot right now. And that's not true, but you believed it briefly when I said it. So it feels true. Certainly, we don't know everything we need to about who's selling. And there's a good reason it's stagnant right now because a lot of teams believe, including the Grimace Mets. But we'll dive into 3 sellers who I think deserve further examination, as well as plenty of your questions and a couple team specifics after this ad read. Yes, this ad read. What's up, baseball fans? Pop a seat, sit down, enjoy yourselves. Because DraftKings is offering a fantastic sign-up bonus for new users. You've never heard me say this before. New customers can place a $5 first bet on any sport to instantly claim $150 in bonus bets when you sign up with our code BASEBALLINSIDER. The best part is you'll receive your rewards even if your first bet loses. Using our code BASEBALLINSIDER not only gets you these bonuses, but it also directly supports our podcast. You've been considering signing up for DraftKings, make sure to use the code BASEBALLINSIDER to maximize your first bets. This offer is only available to new customers who are 21 plus and physically present in illegal gambling states. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. Check the episode description for the full terms of the offer to see if you qualify. Now, on to, and by the way, if you have not joined us in the Discord, if you're not a member of the community, if you're in the comment section curious about how you can learn more about the show, learn more about the rumor mill between episodes, hit the join button on our YouTube channel, join the Discord. You can join at the rumor mill level where you can ask Robert and I questions between shows. You can join at the all-star level where you can get priority question asking, as well as a private Zoom with us once a month. And we're going to be increasing the frequency of that a little bit as we get closer to the deadline when everything is really swirling. I think we're aiming for Tuesday, July 9th for the next one, I think. But join the Discord, talk to us in the All-Star section. We'll figure out the timing on all that. Either way, would love to see you. Appreciate the comments flowing in right now. And Robert, I feel like let's start it with just 3 potential sellers who I think are becoming underrated as both talent-stocked rosters in general and teams that maybe are close to the 500 mark, floating in either direction. Depending on where the wind blows, they could either be buyers or sellers, but there's a lot to love there. I give you 3 teams, and I want to start with the A's because they've been out of the playoff race ostensibly since, when did the season start? Opening day. And so I think a lot of people are like, all right, well, obviously that's a terrible team. Who wants players on that terrible team? And then people started talking about Paul Blackburn as rotation depth. The conversation didn't go much beyond that. Then Mason Miller emerged, and it was just like, ooh, can we get our hands on Mason Miller? Probably not. And then people stopped thinking about the A's so much. There's some talent in the outfield especially who I think don't just write off the A's as like one of the worst rosters in baseball. They'll sell, but who wants them? Brent Rooker isn't the only game-changing outfielder available. JJ Bleday is worth a chat. Miguel Andujar is hitting .330. That feels like someone they could cash in on. Useful pieces in Oakland for at least another couple of weeks before they go full sell.
Oh, 100%. And like it's not the case, as you said, it's not a case where like the team is so bad that they're not going to have anyone to really sell. I mean, the A's, I feel like even though they're toward the bottom of that division, they've kind of exceeded expectations here. At least early on in the season they did, but they have some really intriguing trade pieces. And if you look at the most likely guys, I would probably say Miguel Andujar and Paul Blackburn are among those players who are the most likely to go. And then you look at some of their bigger, more blue chip talent. Mason Miller, he is a guy who is going to attract extreme interest. I mean, if you look at him, he's young, he's controllable. He's gotten, I mean, his velocity is way up there. He makes the best hitters in baseball look silly. He looks like he can end up being a dominant long-term closer or just high leverage reliever for the long haul here. I don't think it's likely that he's traded. I think the asking price is going to be so high that it's going to price out a lot of these teams. Maybe there's one team that can kind of try to come close. Who knows? But I think it's more unlikely than it is likely that he is moved. So I would anticipate Miller staying in place. But JJ Bleday, he is one that I've gotten asked about a lot in the Discord, on Twitter, in this chat here. He is another player who is going to attract a lot of interest. I mean, if you look, he's a really talented young outfielder. They did really well getting him from the Marlins in exchange for AJ Puck. Like, that was a trade that kind of caught me off guard in the moment, but it was a real coup by the A's, and he looks like he could end up being a long-term piece there. I would call it probably another one that's probably unlikely to go, just because if you look, he's young, controllable, signed for cheap. That's exactly the kind of player that the A's want on their roster, because he's not going to take up too much payroll room. So I'm going to guess he's probably unlikely to move, but I wouldn't rule it out, because you never know what one team can offer. And the other one that is pretty intriguing here, I mean, there's other options. I'll mention our guy Lucas Erceg again, because I mean, it feels like every time we talk about the A's, we got to mention Erceg. Yes. But Brent Rooker is a really intriguing one, and he was an under the radar addition by the A's a couple years ago, and he's been awesome. Last year he was great. This year he's been really good as well. I think that kind of trade is possible. I don't think it's like, I don't know exactly where I'd put the odds on that one, but I think it's possible. But if you look, he's signed until 2028, and he's making $850K this year. That's another guy that fits their description for like exactly what you want in an Oakland A's player. But I wouldn't rule that one out. I think I don't know. I don't think it's likely, but it's not impossible. It's somewhere where I'd put that. I think all the players that I just listed are going to end up attracting a lot of interest. And the A's, if they want to, they can end up being big sellers. But the asking prices on these guys are going to be a lot, because they don't have to trade them. And if they're blown away, they can do that. So we'll see. But they have plenty of trade pieces here if they do want to end up going like all in on a sell here.
Yeah, I think people just doubt the A's motivations because they spent this offseason acting like they were on Mars. So you're 100% right that there are players they don't need to hold. They could hold on to. They don't need to trade these players. They could control them for many years, some of which will be spent in Sacramento. But I think nobody knows how the A's are going to act, because they could either be completely reasonable and hold faces of the franchise like Brent Rooker, or we could wake up and go, oh, he's a Brave now. Okay, I guess the A's are starting from scratch again. Like, you just never know. And they scrap. I mean, they scrap, claw, and hit for power. And the reason people are asking about Bleday so much is because people are basically, I think everyone's like, look, no reasonable team should trade Bleday right now if you have him. But are the A's a reasonable team? Can he be got? Yeah. So I think that's where all this confusion motivation comes from. More talent and complete unpredictability.
Oh, it's extreme unpredictability. And we've seen them do it in years past, where they've traded guys who fit these kind of descriptions of the players that I think that they hold on to ultimately here. So who knows? But I think their motivation is going to be more sound here, just because, or I think their motivation here is just going to be more inclined to hold on to them, just because they're signed so cheap and they're controllable. Those are the players that they can build around. And yeah, I think that's going to end up being what goes on here. I would be pretty surprised if they move their long-term controllable and cheap players. We'll see, but that's my stance as of right now.
Speaking of teams that like to move their controllable players, especially in later ARB years, I'm going to take this opportunity to call the Rays an underrated potential seller. We've danced around it a little bit in previous episodes, and we've talked about the bullpen. We've talked about fungible arms. You know, you've mentioned Jason Adam. But this is a 500-ish team that has played better in June, but still has a -50 run differential. And even when they're good, they're always willing to get creative, and it never seems to affect their future much. So I start looking at the list of potential Rays. Randy Arozarena showed up on Jeff Passan's deadline list earlier this week. Yandy Diaz is 33 years old and got a couple more years on a weird little extension and is playing much better in June, like most of the rest of his roster mates. But Isaac Paredes has actually been worse in June, but a ton of control. But then again, the Rays don't totally ever make sense, and Harold Ramirez got DFA'd a couple weeks ago. I mean, how do we parse the Rays as potential sellers right now?
It's tricky because, like, as you noted, they've been a team that has surged a little bit, and it's still possible that they can surge and that they can end up getting in a more firm position to be a playoff contender. But to me, this is total speculation on my end, but they feel like a team where if they're hovering on the edge, they can take advantage of a seller's market, because there's, at least as of this point, there are not many definitive sellers, which means there's going to be few options, and those teams that have those options are going to be able to get more in exchange for them than they previously would. So I would think there's going to be some teams that are on the edge that end up selling a little bit, or at least sell their rental players, and maybe there's some exceptions here or there. But I think the Rays make a lot of sense to be that team. And if you look, Randy Arozarena was a great shout. I think that would be one potential option where teams could check in looking for an outfielder and another bat and see Arozarena and see what it would take to get him. Yandy Diaz would make a lot of sense as well. Jason Adam is a player who I've talked about pretty extensively here. Also wrote a column last week mentioning him as a potential fit for the Kansas City Royals. Adam was not you, Adam, but Jason Adam. He was drafted by the Royals about a decade ago, give or take.
I was also drafted by the Royals about a decade ago, to be fair. So it's confusing between the two of us. But you're talking about the reliever, not me.
Yeah, although, I mean, you have had a good career. So, I mean, shout out to you.
Yeah, very proud of myself.
But Jason Adam has been a guy, or he was a guy who was drafted by the Royals, and the scouting director at the time was J.J. Piccolo, who is currently the Royals' general manager. He grew up in the Kansas City area. Not that that matters in a potential trade scenario, but that would, considering his ties to the Royals, with Piccolo, and then also the Royals' need for a high leverage reliever, I think that makes a lot of sense. So that could be one thing to watch. And then another one here would be Zach Eflin. Eflin was one of their big ticket additions a couple of years ago. Signed him kind of out of the blue. There was a few other teams that were in the race, but ultimately Eflin ended up choosing to go to Tampa Bay. And I would not be surprised if he's on the move. I think he's a player who makes a lot of sense for teams that need starting pitching. And I mean, maybe a team like the Braves can make sense there. There's plenty of teams that can make sense for Eflin. So I think he's going to end up being one to watch. And the Rays are a team to watch that could be on the edge, that leans towards selling.
So you're telling me the richest contract in Rays free agent history, which was already kind of laughably small, could be on the move after a year and a half of the 3 years? Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, it's possible. And I mean, I don't think there's anything, there's nothing definitive here. I mean, this is like, we're still it's June 27th. So we still got about a month and like 4 days until the deadline.
Yeah, a month and some days.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot that can happen, and what we think now could look totally different in a couple of weeks. But that is currently what I'm thinking. And if they do, they could be in position to really kind of stockpile their minor league system if they wanted to.
And they always want to. So my third team here could, at minimum, stock their minor league system, maybe more so than any other current major league team fighting through the decision of whether to buy or sell. Just have to ask that the Tigers are my third seller. Because if they do make Tarik Skubal available, and there was some scuttlebutt this week about how the Dodgers and Orioles could overwhelm them and how they're leaning, they're floating in both directions, trying to play the market and discern if they're going to make him available or not. Dodgers and Orioles just sounds like connecting the teams with the two best farms to the AL Cy Young winner and calling it a day. Like, that doesn't sound like actual smoke. Obviously, either could overwhelm the Tigers, but we don't know if either will or will even try. But current gauge on his market and the rest of the Tigers. Has anything changed in Detroit since we last spoke on Monday?
No. I'm going to start with this because this is probably the most important trade deadline disclaimer that I can possibly put out, is that listening and making available are two totally different things, because teams listen on almost every player. There are some exceptions for sure. But I would say 99.5% of players are listened on in trade conversations because teams want to know what's out there. And like what they could end up getting in return for that player. But making a player available is that's a totally different thing. And I think this is going to end up being a case where the Tigers listen on Skubal. I think that's going to end up being, there's going to be a lot of players, or there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be interested in him. I mean, why not? Because he's controllable. He's their definitive ace in Detroit. He's a strong Cy Young candidate. And it's just, it wouldn't make much sense at all for the Tigers to trade him unless they got a haul that is just way too good to be true. And I mean, maybe there's a team out there that's willing to do it. I'm going to guess probably not. So I think it's very, 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 very likely that he stays put. I'll never say it's impossible because we know weird shit happens in baseball. But I would be really surprised if he goes. But that being said, the Tigers, they have some intriguing trade pieces here. Jack Flaherty figures to be one of the top options on the market, and I would fully expect him to get moved. And it's a very similar situation to what they ended up having happen last year with Michael Lorenzen, where Lorenzen pitched really well for the Tigers in the first half, and then they ended up trading him to Philadelphia, and they got a pretty good prospect in return. So that deal looked like a coup for them. Flaherty should get a decent return. As I said, I fully expect him to go. Mark Canha is another one who is a pretty intriguing trade option here, and I think he'll go. Carson Kelly might be an under the radar one to watch just because teams need backup catching. But they got plenty of trade options, but I would focus on the top two more than anything, and not Skubal. I would just, there's going to be a lot of speculation surrounding him, but I'm telling you, I would be really surprised if he goes.
Yeah, it's still, I would also be really surprised if this is the last time that we talked about him. But that is, look, that's the trade deadline a month out. I still think the Tigers, like you said, have some interesting pieces there. And Flaherty all of a sudden might be Flaherty and Tyler Anderson. Who would have thunk it? The Paul Rudd meme, suddenly the top two pitching options on the market. Got a lot of good questions I want to get to. But before we pivot, might as well talk about the number one team that's gone from pitching rich to pitching starved because of injuries, the Miami Marlins, and specifically what to make of Jazz Chisholm as a trade deadline candidate. Because he might be, in addition to Skubal, he's the name that has emerged in assorted columns the past couple days that intrigued me the most. In Mark Feinsand's column, one AL executive was quoted as saying, the swagger has outpaced his actual production, which I think you and I would agree, very, very true. But I think I was a little surprised, even this is sad, but I was surprised to learn that he's been above average with the bat this year. I thought the OPS plus was going to be hovering below 100, but he's actually around 110, 112. And he provides electricity and 2.5 years of control. That's going to cost someone, even if the swagger has outpaced the production. Jim Bowden went as far as to say this week he's the most likely position player to move this summer. I don't know if I'd go that far, and I feel like you probably wouldn't either, but what's your gauge on Chisholm the player, Chisholm the person, and Chisholm the asset?
Yeah, I'll start with that last part. Is it possible that he's moved? For sure. Yeah. But do I think he's the most likely player to go? I think that's an extreme exaggeration. I think there's players who are far more likely to go than he is because the Marlins, they don't have to trade him. And with having the 2.5 years of control, they can be patient especially if they don't get offers to their liking. But as far as Chisholm the player, I think the assessment of that executive that Feinsand talked to is spot on. I mean, he's been more flashy with his swag than he has been on the field, and he does have value. He's a good player for sure. I think there will be interest, but I don't know. I don't necessarily think he's going to have the strongest of markets. That's at least my view on it right now. But that being said, the Marlins are they're open for business. But considering their rotation injuries and just losing Jesus Luzardo, and I mean he's not going to get moved, at least as of this point, unless something happens that I don't foresee. But that injury was a huge gut punch for them. Like all the injuries in that rotation have been a gut punch for them. So I wouldn't expect any of their high-end starters to go. Tanner Scott feels like almost as a sure thing of a player to be moved at the deadline as anyone. So I'd look for him to go. But just going back to Chisholm, I think it'll be like a halfway decent market. But like I don't think it's going to be the case where he's guaranteed to be moved.
Yes, that's what I felt like we were going to land on, but it's good to examine. I'm going to throw a couple of my other prepared talking points in the trash because I want to go to the questions. We got a good question pile.
Yeah, we do, except from Jacob. His questions suck.
Yeah, no, of course. Most of the questions are good. Some are bad. The bad ones come from Jacob, but one of the good ones comes from Brandon Rindfleisch, longtime All-Star member, asking about the Brewers and the starting pitcher market. So why don't we start here? Hearing anything on how the NL Central's eternal first place team, no matter what happens to them, they seem to have inherited the Cardinals' devil magic. They're sitting in first place, sitting pretty. What are they looking at in terms of potential midseason upgrades?
Yeah, I would fully anticipate the Brewers being in the mix for a starting pitcher or two. And we saw the Dallas Keuchel move yesterday. He ended up pitching yesterday. And yeah. I mean, playing behind that defense is going to end up making you look better. And so far, the Brewers look like a team that with their defense and also their pitching, they've been able to, it's been defense, offense, which I did not necessarily expect this year. And then their pitchers, for the most part, have stepped up. But they need additional help. And I expect them to add at least one or two different arms. But it's their defense that could allow them to not necessarily go the high end route. Because I think a guy like Garrett Crochet makes a lot of sense. But that being said, he makes a lot of sense for a lot of these teams. Like you look at the Orioles, you look at the Dodgers, you look at the Padres. I mean, there's plenty of different teams who make sense for Crochet, and the price there is going to end up being real high. But if the Brewers want, they can go for like a mid-tier starter and then hope for that defense to elevate them to a new level. Because one thing that they've done in years past, I watched them do this with Jordan Lyles. He had not Elias Diaz. It was, I can't remember who he had catching for him in Pittsburgh, but his ERA was hovering around 5 or 6. And then he ended up going to the Brewers, was working with a better pitch framer in Yasmani Grandal, and also worked with their elite infield defense. And his ERA improved drastically. And it makes me wonder if that could end up being a route that they go with. I think it's something that I would anticipate they explore. But that being said, if they their long-term core with their rotation, they got Freddie Peralta, they got DL Hall, they've got Jacob Mizorowski. There's another one I'm forgetting too. I can't remember who the other one was. Mizorowski, by the way, I would firmly expect him to get called up at some point this year and pitch out of the bullpen. That's my guess. That's my feel as of right now. And then add another option or two from the trade market into the rotation. I think that team can make some noise in the postseason and could even make a run because they look pretty dangerous right now. Pat Murphy's got them going. And Robert Gasser, thank you very much, Anthony Romero. Woodruff is not going to be pitching this year. I think that's at least the update. I think that's kind of what the expectation was going into the year. Yeah. I mentioned the Padres drew with Crochet, but hey Jacob, you're saying that your Cubs are in last place, so yeah, get on Tubby.
Make a run for the showers, bro. I mean, talking about, I was actually gonna go Padres. I mean, there's a Padres question about potential outfield help with Tatis missing somewhat significant time. And that's sort of a mysterious injury too. That's like, hey, the leg's just not right, so let's get it right, which is not what you want to hear if you're a Padres fan. But what you do want to hear is they've won 7 of 8 or 6 of 7, I believe, and have some of the best vibes in baseball surrounding Jurickson Profar. The offense is working as a unit. Feels like 9 men, a collective, working towards the same goal. That's what you want as a baseball fan. Padres fans, good time to buy tickets to a home game right now. Despite the Tatis injury, where are they looking? Are they happy with their short-term solutions, or are they looking for an outfielder?
It's complicated for the Padres right now because Preller's been very active on the phones like that. Which is the norm for him. I mean, he's one of the most, actually, I'd probably even venture to say he's the most aggressive general manager in baseball. And it's just what he does. He's aggressive in conversations, but that being said, I don't necessarily know how much money they have available to upgrade this roster. And it's just, it kind of puts them in a different and difficult position. They obviously were able to acquire Luis Arraez, included Woo-Suk go in the deal. And the Marlins ate a lot of his contract. So they were able to facilitate that deal. But I don't know exactly how much flexibility they have at the deadline, which could end up making it pretty difficult to add a sizable upgrade. But that being said, I would imagine starting pitching is going to end up being one of their priorities, or probably their top priority. They need to add at least 1 or 2 starting pitchers. Maybe explore some outfield help. The emergence of Jurickson Profar has been awesome for them. I think that was probably the most unexpected thing to happen with them this season, because he was an afterthought signing. He signed for super cheap, and I remember in the moment he was choosing between 3 or 4 teams, and all of a sudden, like there was teams that offered more money, but he viewed the Padres as an opportunity to get more playing time. It's a place that he was comfortable and a place that he thought he'd thrive in, and ultimately it's worked out about as well as he could have hoped for. So I think the Padres will poke around looking for an outfielder for sure. And then also relievers. I think that's going to be another high leverage reliever is going to end up being something that they end up looking at. So there's a lot that they can consider, and Preller's been very aggressive, but I just don't know how much flexibility he has to make those moves happen. So we'll see. But aggressive is the word that I'd put with AJ Preller here.
Speaking of a team that we sort of matched with the Padres this offseason in a deal that was not necessarily consummated, and I think Red Sox fans are happy it wasn't, I'm going to go to Ryan Pizer's question on the Red Sox. Maybe despite surging into a playoff spot and within range of the top of the AL East, it does feel like we've gotten plenty of trade Kenley stories over the last couple weeks because they're not afraid to continue to look for upgrades. They have a strong bullpen as is. They have Liam Hendricks coming back at some point. It would seem he threw some bullpens this week. Chris Martin and Kenley Jansen appear. I don't know if it's the chopping block or just the taking calls phase, but the Red Sox seem willing to mix and match despite being in the catbird seat right now and right in the thick of the playoff race. What's your take on the potential of maybe swapping bullpen for a bat or bullpen for another need?
Yeah, I think what's possible for them is trading some of their rental players and trying to end up adding more controllable players. And I mean, that sounds like selling, but I think it could end up being a mix of selling the rentals and then trying to upgrade the major league roster in different ways, in different trades. So I think that's going to end up being something that the Red Sox explore. I think that's one of their options that they probably will explore. There's so many. I said it on the last pod. Ownership needs to give that front office the green light to go buy, because you don't know if this is Alex Cora's last season in Boston, considering his contract is up. They're overperforming right now. There's a lot going on that's good with that Red Sox team. So investing in that roster and trying to make it better, I think, is something that they should explore, and they absolutely need to do. It's not a Craig Breslow thing. It's an ownership thing, and I'm skeptical that they'll do it just because, I mean, look at what's happened in recent history here. They've been cheap, and it's been really unfortunate because that storied Boston Red Sox franchise, it doesn't feel the same right now, and it's all squarely on ownership. And I want to address these Pirates questions because I've seen Canyon mention this about 4 times about the Andrew
with him.
about the Andrew Filipponi tweet. No, that's my official response to that is no. And do I ultimately think the Pirates front office backs up what they're saying? I will never guarantee anything, but I think they're very intent and serious about trying to upgrade this roster. And if they can end up going and adding another bat, I think they'd absolutely do it. And the thing is we saw Bob Nutting mention that he's given the front office the green light to go add players early and try to jump the market. But that being said, there's like no one really available right now.
Yeah.
There's like, I mean, I think a player who makes so much sense for the Pirates is Taylor Ward. I think he would improve that team in a lot of different ways. And if they can end up adding him, maybe adding some other pieces to that roster to improve the offense, which has been really underwhelming, I think that'd be a really good start. But considering what Bob Nutting has said, what Ben Cherington has said, and then where they're at in the standings, because they're hovering around 500 right now, and they have two of the most electrifying pitchers in baseball, in Paul Skeens and Jared Jones. They're a playoff nightmare for any team in a short series. I think they have to seriously explore going out and getting a bat or two, and I anticipate that they ultimately, in the end, will do it. Mitch Keller is a good shot. I can't believe I forgot him. Like, they have so many good young pitchers. They just extended him for Pete's sakes. Like, they have so much talent, or young talent on that team, where if they end up supplementing it with more veteran talent in the trade market here, they can end up making some noise in the postseason here and also in future years to come as well.
Before we sign off, should we give Jacob a gift?
No. Wait, Zanola?
Well, we've got a Troy Zesmarski question asking if the Cubs are buyers or sellers. Just we haven't talked about the Cubs other than just dismissing them in a while. And I don't know, like we got a couple of minutes. Should we do some actual analysis of where the Cubs stand, or should we be mean?
No, I mean, I'll give some actual analysis on where the Cubs stand. They're 37-44 right now, and they're in last place in that division. They have been the most disappointing team in baseball. And to me, they look more like sellers than they do buyers. And I mean, maybe they end up making a surge to get themselves back in position to go add, but right now they do not look like that kind of team at all. And it's just been a huge disappointment. And if we're being real, they invested so much in Craig Counsell to maximize that team, but Jed Hoyer didn't give them enough pieces in that bullpen. And there's holes in that roster that, I mean, they stand out like a sore thumb right now. It's a roster construction issue, and I think some heat's got to be put on Jed Hoyer here. He's going to have to answer some difficult questions from ownership if they miss the postseason, or even have to decide to sell at the deadline, because that is not what the Cubs hired Craig Counsell for, and not what Hoyer went all in for when trying to hire Counsell. So I think, yeah, Hoyer's going to be his seat's not like hot right now. He's not going to get fired right now by any means, but if this fall continues, then his seat could end up getting warm. I think that might be an underrated storyline to watch here. By the way, what is it? Ryan Pizer, is that how you pronounce your last name? Maybe the Pirates make a push for a guy like Vlad Jr. No. I don't anticipate Vlad Jr. going anywhere. So I would get that out of your mind. And I don't think the Pirates would be in position to make a move like that. So I think that's, I would not get your hopes up for that. There was another one here that I wanted to address. It was from Jacob Hartline, the superior Jacob in this chat. Give this Jacob something about the Braves getting some outfield help, please. I do expect them to look at the outfield. And I don't think it's going to be in a case of like a Luis Robert kind of situation. I think it's going to be lesser options than that. So I wouldn't get your hopes up for a star. But that being said, like trying to replace a guy like Ronald Acuna Jr. is impossible. He's just that dynamic of a player. But I anticipate them adding someone there and maybe even exploring maybe something in the rotation as well. But we'll see there. That one's, I'm kind of getting, I don't know exactly what to make of that quite yet, but I'm trying to get some answers.
Well, we'll have more answers the next time you see us. It'll be next week on Monday, 3:30 Eastern, right back here, hopefully addressing some nice changes, some nice buzz, a little rumor soup that pops up over the weekend. we hope to see you right back here, 3:30 Eastern on Monday, going through every change that pops up over the weekend. For now, thank you for joining us. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Hit join if you haven't. Pick your level if you want to join the Discord. Rumor Mill, All-Star. I like them both. We're in both. We like talking to you in both, so ask us questions between shows. If you ask us a question right when we're about to go live, we'll try to prioritize it in the feed. Otherwise, pop into the comment section. Give us the good stuff. Help fuel the show. You guys do an awesome job of that in the comment section. We couldn't do it without you, and I couldn't do it on a very fundamental level without Robert Murray. So, Robert, thank you for all that you do, and I appreciate you coming on today, man.
No, I appreciate you. I hope everyone has a great weekend. We appreciate you watching. And Monday, well, I'm sure we'll have another loaded show as well as we get closer to the trade deadline. So you gotta love it, baby. This is my favorite time of the year.
Yeah, there's nothing like a July Baseball Insider show, except for, I guess, a November, December Baseball Insider show, January show. I mean, there are a lot of good times to do a show. October show, playoffs. I mean, we got a lot of loaded baked potatoes for you coming up. So now is a pretty good time to get on board.
Yeah, although I'm not a baked potato guy, so it's like, yeah, I mean, that's another food take. I haven't dropped a food take in a while.
Yeah, I should have known that you were going to have a weird reaction to that.
I did tell somebody yesterday that I don't like butter, and that kind of got me canceled in real life. So that was kind of tough. I was basically asked what's wrong with you, which, I mean, that's a loaded question. Not a loaded baked potato, but it's a loaded question.
Butter's an interesting one. I mean, when butter is a secret, like in a cookie, sign me up. When I'm looking at butter on a baked potato, less desirable. But hey, weigh in the comments. Join us in the Discord. Let us know if that take was off base. Something tells me you're about to. So whether I ask for it or not, it's going to happen. But we'll see you right back here Monday, 3:30 Eastern. Thanks for joining us on the Baseball Insiders. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.